I'm honored to present our 14th annual Shoah Holocaust Commemoration Program. The Shoah is among the most tragic of Jewish catastrophes, and we believe the Shoah must never become a historical footnote, but always be respectfully remembered by all. Each year, as Rabbi Anti mentioned, our theme is yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And the key objectives of the program are to honor the memory of the more than 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, to provide Holocaust education, and to encourage each of us to provide support and protection for all Jews wherever they may live, and to combat anti-Semitism. In the past, we have been privileged to present a wide variety of programs, including chief rabbis and dignitaries such as Chief Rabbi of Poland, Romania, and Hungary, ambassadors to the United States from countries where the Holocaust took place, a Jewish Hungarian community activist, a son of a Nazi officer, and most importantly, as we have been honored with many Holocaust survivor speakers, such as the one we have tonight. So we will begin with our speaker, Holocaust survivor, author, philanthropist, and founder of the Zahor organization, Mr. Ben Lesser. His talk will be followed by our participatory Holocaust commemoration ceremony, and we're very honored to have 3 generations from one family to lead the legacy readings. And at the end of the program, we'll have a few minutes to do a Q&A, where you'll have the opportunity to ask Ben any questions you might have. So we are truly honored to have Ben Lesser here as our speaker tonight. Ben's story is miraculous. He survived an astounding 4 concentration camps, including Auschwitz, the 7-week death march, and the notorious ill-fated death train from Buchenwald to Dachau. Today, he is the only person who remains that has survived the death train to Dachau and is alive to tell us about it. He has testified at 2 Nazi war crimes trials and is the author of Living a Life That Matters: From Nazi Nightmares to American Dream. And he established the Zahor Holocaust Remembrance Foundation, the Zahor Holocaust Curriculum for Educators, and the I Shout Out Project, which we'll find out about. So we're truly honored to welcome Ben to speak. Thank you very much. Please go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Yes, my friends, I come to you from an era in history where civilization lost its humanity, its heart. A time when there were only 3 kinds of people in this world. There were the killers, the victims, and the bystanders. The rest of the world were all bystanders. It turns out we now know that everybody knew exactly what's happening to Jewish people, but they chose to be silent, giving Hitler carte blanche to go ahead and do with the Jewish people whatever he wants. Well, normally my story will take about 2.5 hours or sometimes 3 hours, but I'll cut it down to as much as possible. And that creates a little problem, but it can't be helped. So to tell you a little bit about my family, I had a wonderful family of 7, and a father, mother, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters. And out of this wonderful family of 7, only 2 of us survived, my sister Lola and I. The rest of the family were all slaughtered. There's Lola and I. We're the only survivors. What can I tell you? We lived in Krakow, Poland, and we also had a home for summer homes that we would go to Munkacs, Hungary, where my mother's side of the family lived. And when the war broke out, my older sister Goldie was with her grandparents in Munkacs, and she got stuck there. So it's a good thing that happened because Hungary was a free country. And anyway, we lived on a major thoroughfare in Krakow. And one morning, the whole buildings that we lived in, a 3-story building, an apartment house, and we were on the ground floor on one side, and on the other side of our floor, there was another Jewish family. The rest, we were the only 2 Jewish families in the building. One early in the morning at 5 a.m., the whole building started to shake and rattle. So I ran to the window to see what was going on. And as I looked out, I saw tanks were rolling down the street. Following the tanks were half tracks. Every few steps, a soldier would jump out from a half track, get on the sidewalk. And this is how they occupied the city. There was no fighting. Following them were the Wehrmacht with their shiny black boots and their goose steps. It was quite impressionable for a 11-year-old. I wasn't quite 11 years old yet at the time, but none of us really knew what is going to happen. But I have to proceed with my story, so I'll jump from there. Um, the fifth day of occupation of Krakow, we found out what Nazi brutality was all about. A truck pulls up to the gate of our apartment house and they started to bang on that gate. And as the super came running out, what's going on? All they wanted to know where the Jewish people lived. And he was quick to oblige. He said the Lessers live here and this other family lived on the other side. And they came rushing in with sacks in their hands and pistol whipping us while we were still in bed and screaming to throw in all our valuables, money, silver, gold, anything they can find of value into those sacks. And they were beating up my father to opening up the safe. As my father is trying to open up the safe, we heard a terrible screaming from our neighbor's apartment. My sister Lola, the one who survived, and I ran out through the kitchen door, and we ran into their kitchen door to see what was going on. And when we came in, this is what we saw. This monster was holding this infant boy by its legs and swinging it and screaming to the parents, make him shut up. And the parents are yelling, our baby, don't hurt our baby. With a smirk on his face, you can see he was enjoying what he was doing. He smashes the baby's head into a doorpost, killing it instantly. It's a memory that won't leave me. It's constantly with me. I hear that screaming baby in that sudden silence and what I saw on the floor. My God. We all jumped on this monster, and of course, we were all pistol whipped to get off him. And these Nazis were a little surprised themselves. They probably haven't seen anything like this. And they said, come on, Hans, let's go. And they gathered up all their valuables that they collected, put it in sacks and threw it in the truck and took off. That was only the fifth day of occupation. And from that day on, things started to happening, one thing after another. New ordinances were coming in. My God, you had to wear Star of David, you had the curfew, we couldn't travel, we couldn't go here, we couldn't work here, one thing after another. And there were no judges or juries against the Jewish people, not even jails. If they found any of the Jewish people disobeying any of these ordinances, there was only one punishment: they shot you. And every morning you saw people dead, unbelievable scenes. But new ordinances came out, an ordinance that the Jewish people could no longer reside in Krakow. But they gave us a choice. If you want to stay in Krakow, you can go into this ghetto that they formed. Now, this was the only time they ever gave people a choice. And if you didn't want to go into the ghetto, you have to live in a small community outside of Krakow, but not in the big city. Well, we decided to go to a small community because my sister had a boyfriend who they were moving to that community. And anyway, we came to that community. We were there about almost a year. My sister Lola and Michael get married, and um, how we survived that year is another story in itself. But one day, Anyway, this was Lola's marriage group, the guests. And there were more. There were about 300 people there in the backyard. And out of the 300 people, only 3 survivors, Michael, my brother-in-law, my sister, Lola, and I. Everybody else was slaughtered. No one survived. Anyway, we came to this community. We stayed in that little house, but that's a story in itself. One day we find out where Lola and Michael lived, their landlord told them that um, he happened to be the mayor of that community. He says, Lola, Michael, save yourselves. I heard that there's going to be a raid against the Jewish people. And when Michael heard that, he hired a wagon with a driver, a horse and buggy. In the middle of the night, we took everything that we can carry, we threw it in, and we took off. Now, the only place we can go was a city called Bochnia. Bochnia had a ghetto. That meant we had to go inside the ghetto. And Bochnia ghetto had a very bad reputation. Every so often, 2 or 3 dump trucks would come in the ghetto in the middle of the night, and they would go from house to house and pull out the children from their beds and throw them into these dump trucks. You can imagine the parents were screaming for their children. The children are screaming for their parents. And as they filled up the 2 or 3 dump trucks, they started to pull out of the ghetto. The parents were running behind these trucks and screaming for their children. But these cultured people had machine guns at the end of each truck. And as the parents were running behind, they were opening the machine guns and mow down the parents in front of their children. No one ever heard about from these children again. We can just imagine what happened to them. And of course, this news resonated throughout Europe. Everybody heard, stay away from Bochnia Ghetto because of these atrocities. But we had no choice. We had to go in there. So we get in. How we got into the ghetto, I'll have to skip this, but to tell you that much, that they put us into 1-room apartment with 8 other people. So my father, my mother, myself, my little brother, with 8 other people. My sister, Lola, and her husband and his family went someplace else, another apartment. My older brother, who was also married, he moved out, and I didn't know at that point where he was. So here we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, 1-room apartment. That's all it was 1 room, and they had no beds. All they had was straw on the ground, blankets over the straw, and blankets were hanging from the ceiling, partitioning off each family. There was some broken down furniture. In the middle of this broken furniture, there was one piece of furniture that was ornate. It was a beautiful armoire where you hang your coats, your jackets, and your coats. Well, I didn't pay attention to this, but while in the ghetto, I had to work. My job was, I was about 13 years old at the time. My job was to sew on buttons um, in a uniform factory. So the job wasn't too hard, but things, the Laban's conditions were unbelievable. One day, Michael and Lola found out that there is going to be a raid against the Jewish people that night. So, and a Jewish policeman from the ghetto told him that, and he says, hide, Michael, Lola, hide yourselves. So ever since those trucks with the children that were pulled out from their beds would come into the ghetto, every house and every apartment had a hiding place. They called them bunkers. This is when I found out that our bunker was this piece of furniture where you hang your coats and jackets. When you open the door, you push the closing apart and the back panel would slide apart. There was a hole in the wall where 12 people could crawl through that hole and stand between two buildings. Fortunately for us, the outside of the buildings were connected, but the ceiling was open and it was snowing, it was freezing cold. And all night long we were standing there. Of course, the last person had to close the door from inside, put the clothing back, close the back panel. And this is how we tried to be safe there, hopefully. And we were there all night. We heard screamings and yelling. We heard our neighbors being torn apart by dogs, Nazi dogs. This was going on all night, shooting, screaming, yelling. Towards morning, it got quiet. When it got quiet, we dared to come out. And when we came outside, what we saw in front of our eyes was unbelievable. We saw people laying in the snow. Some people were torn apart by dogs, mothers holding their infants being ripped apart. You couldn't even recognize any of them. And there are people going around with push carts and picking up these bodies and putting them in the push carts and taking them to the ghetto square, piling them up as high as they could. And these cultured people came with gasoline cans, threw gasoline over them, and lit a human bonfire in Bochnia Ghetto Square. What can I tell you? The smell and the screaming and the crying, what went on. But then it got a little quiet when the Nazis all left and they took most of the people out of the ghetto. I had to see what happened to my sister Lola. Her family, his family rather, were hiding in a doghouse. And Lola and Michael did not hide there. They had another hiding place. But when they came back to see what happened to the family, they found the whole family laying on the ground with a bullet hole in the middle of their head. And Lola saw it, she started to scream. And of course, he told her, Michael, you can't scream because they might still hear you someplace. There's still burning bodies there. Anyway, with a quelched cry, they knew what they had to do because according to the Jewish religion, you're supposed to bury your loved ones within 72 hours. Michael went out and found a rickety wheelbarrow. He put the family on it and he took him to the cemetery inside the ghetto. They found a shovel and Lola with her bare hands, they buried the family. Anyway, from this point on, I had to skip a lot, but to tell you that our family, Michael and Lola, and our family, plus another 30 or 50 people, were able to get out of the ghetto. We helped them smuggle them out of the ghetto. And the way they got out, they were very grateful that we helped them, and we all had little apartments in Bochnia, in the city. We were hiding as non-Jews. And Michael found a truck driver who was hauling coal. So he asked him, would you please convert your truck into a double-decker, coal on top, between the coal and the chassis, there'll be room for people to hide. And if you take him to the Czech border, we will have a smuggler waiting there and we will pay you a lot of money if you do it. And he did that. And somehow we went out. In this truck, there was room for 10 people, 5 and 5, like sardines laid out next to each other. This trucks that you see here, my sister's paintings, by the way, that you see here, was my father and mother was supposed to leave with this group of other 8 people, though they were 10 altogether. And somehow a Polish farmer saw what was going on. He called the Gestapo and they came and they pulled everybody out. And all 10 people plus the driver, which were 11, were lined up against the wall and everyone was shot. We don't know this because we went through, and just to tell you how we went through in this truck, we were laid out like sardines, and I'm next to my little brother, and we leave Bochnia. About 2 hours out of Bochnia, we're being stopped, halt, Nazis. And we see through the cracks soldiers with rifles all around us. And we didn't hear what they were saying to the driver because the roar of the engine was so loud. And all of a sudden, they start to drive again, move. And we felt relief, but then suddenly we hear soldiers walking on top of the coal, and the coal dust is filtering through. My little brother is about to sneeze, and I'm holding his nose and mouth. And we look out and we see that on the first steps, there's a soldier with a rifle. On the other step, there's a soldier with a rifle. Where they're taking us, probably we felt to a cemetery or a forest, and they're going to shoot us. Through 2 hours, they were with us, and then the truck stops, and we are saying our prayers already. Then all of a sudden, we hear, Danke schön, Danke schön. They were just hitchhiking. Imagine having these Nazi soldiers on top. They didn't even know there are 10 Jewish people hiding under their coal in the same truck traveling together. It was a miracle. It was a miracle. And then afterwards, about 2 hours later, he arrived to the forest. He let us out. He told us to go up to this forest. In about 300 yards, there is a tool shed. Inside the tool shed, there's a smuggler. He happened to be a forest ranger, and he will smuggle you eventually across. So he took us to the middle of a forest, and it was near the border. And we can see the soldiers walking up and down with their dogs at the end on top of the mountain. And we had to lay on our stomach quietly. And exactly at 3 a.m., we knew that these soldiers are coming down the hill, and down there they meet fresh soldiers, and they exchange places, and somehow they have a little ceremony. During that 5 or 10 minutes, there was a chance for us to cross the border. So at 3 o'clock, we started to shimmy up. We saw the soldiers going down. We shimmied up, and we came to the borderline. He picked up the barbed wire, and we crossed. He told us that on the other side of the barbed wire, there's the big ravine. You can fall down from that mountain. So be careful not to tumble, because if you make a noise, it's all over. He advised us to sit down and hold hands and slide down, which we did. He says, don't worry, there's a plateau near the bottom, which we did. And sure enough, there was a plateau, but it was so pitch black, we couldn't see our hands in front of us. And I'm asking my brother, are you okay? He says, yes. When all of a sudden, somebody, excuse me, okay, and all of a sudden someone taps me on my shoulder and he says, Beinisch? I almost jumped out of my skin. Who in this middle of wilderness, in the middle of the night, in the dark, he says, Beinisch, but only my family members called me that. To other people, I was Ben or Benek. And He says, I'm your Uncle Belo, your mother's brother. How did you know where to find me here in this wilderness? He says, well, when your sister Lola and Michael went across a few days earlier, they got in touch with us and they told us exactly the spot. So I was waiting here for you. I'm going to take you to your other uncle. My other uncle, my mother's brother, another one, had a house there, and were able to take a bath, and he fed us, and he had fresh clothes for us. And the next day we had to smuggle through another border to go to Hungary from Czechoslovakia. And that's another story. But eventually we came into Hungary and we took a train to Budapest. In Budapest, my sister Lola and Michael were waiting for us, and we had a nice meal. And afterwards, we had to leave to go to Munkacs because my family from my mother's side all lived in Munkacs, and my older sister was in Munkacs. So after a few hours of traveling by train, we arrived in Munkacs. The whole family is so happy to see us, and they welcome us. And one uncle asked if I would stay with my little brother in his house, and I agreed. So we stayed there. And he was a wealthy man because he had a yardage goods store where he sold fabric for dresses and for suits. So um, above the store, he had his house, and we stayed there. And I told my uncle, I says, Uncle, if the Nazis ever come into Hungary, they'll take away all your valuables, all your assets. It would make a lot of sense if you convert some of your assets into something tangible that you can hide, like diamonds or jewelry. And he listened to me. And one day he comes home with boxes full of shoes. And he tells every member of the family, knows that in the heels of the shoes there are diamonds. Use it only in a life-threatening situation. To be aware of it. If you can save your life with those diamonds, know it's there. So, and sure enough, the people in Hungary, most of them didn't believe what I was telling them, but the family believed. And life was going on as normal. People were going to temples and churches, and there was weddings and bar mitzvahs and outdoor cafes and dancing. And don't ask, it was nothing. And this was going on. And of course, we were waiting for our parents and they never arrived. Then we found out what happened to them. But in, in March of 1944, the Nazis just marched into Hungary like they were invited guests. And when they came in, they knew every Jewish family where they lived, their ages, their education, their businesses, everything. How? They didn't have computers like they do today. Well, IBM had punch cards, and they would sell these punch cards to anyone who would pay the price. IBM doesn't deny it, but they say they had no idea for what purpose they're going to use these punch cards. So within 3 to 4 weeks, they were already shuttling people to the death camps. And this is what they told us. They told us, you will all be relocated to Germany. Able-bodied men and women will be working, and children will be cared for. Bring along all of your valuables and leave everything else, whatever you can carry, but leave everything else behind. Anyone found hiding will be shot. And they marched us out. They marched us to the kettle cars. They had kettle cars waiting, 80 people to a kettle car, and they lined us up and they told us to get in. Well, 80 people to a kettle car wouldn't be so bad if it were not for the bundles and valises that everybody had. It was so tight. that if somebody wanted to sit down, someone else had to stand up. And the conditions in there, the older people, pregnant women, infants, uh, sick people, you can't imagine. All they had is two buckets in the corner. And when the water was gone, when the water was gone, there were no sanitary facilities, none whatsoever, no toilets, nothing. They just had these two buckets. After the water was gone, people used it to relieve themselves. And after 1 day, 2 days, these buckets were filled up. Now the human waste was flowing over, and now we're on our third day. You can't imagine the conditions. We were now happy that we had bundles. We can sit on the bundles, not on the floor with all the human waste. And finally, we arrived at a place and we see a sign lit up. It was nighttime. It says Oświęcim. Oświęcim was Polish for Auschwitz. None of us knew about an Oświęcim or not even an Auschwitz. We had no idea. And the train didn't stop there. It continues for about a kilometer or two, and then it stopped. And when it stopped, we saw a gate, and on top of the gate it said, Arbeit macht frei. Leben, work gives you freedom. Labor gives you freedom. Well, we knew that made sense. It's a labor camp. The train stood there for a couple hours, and then it started to move again. And it moved for another 2 or 3 kilometers, and it stopped at a place called Birkenau. In Birkenau, they opened up the gate and all the doors, and all hell broke loose. The Nazis were screaming, but the dogs are barking, raus, raus, schnell. There were inmates with striped clothes yelling in all different languages. Leave all your belongings where it is. Don't you pick anything up. Women and children to the right, a man to the left, and I'm holding on to my sister Goldie, my little brother Tuli, and we're just ripped apart, never to see each other again. I didn't know that, but they went directly to the gas chambers. Who knew? We never heard of such a thing. And we came into this place, and it was nighttime, and they line us up, and we see 5 chimneys with ashes spewing out of it and flames shooting out of it. We didn't know what it was. Some of the inmates, some of the men in front of me were saying, oh, those must be smelting factories. This is probably where we will be working. Who knew? We had no idea that those were ashes flying from our dear departed ones being slaughtered there, being gassed and burned. My God, we had no idea. And as we went forward, I see this man in a white frock and white gloves, and he's going right, left, right, left. That was Dr. Mengele, the angel of death. He decided who should live and who should die with a flick of his finger. When I came close enough, I heard him ask a question of a young man. Kannst du 5 kilometers laufen? Can you run 5 kilometers? Or would you rather go by truck? And he said he had a bad knee. He would rather go by truck. Who knew? That poor soul, that meant certain death. They sent him to ride. But it didn't make sense to me because I see barracks. I figured, why would he ask such a question? So I figured he's testing us to see if we're strong enough to work. So I went out in front of him, and I was 15 and a half, and I wasn't very tall. So I stretched myself out, and I saluted him, and I said, 18 Jahre alt, gesund und arbeitsfähig. I'm 18 years old, I'm healthy, and I can work. He did ask me, kannst du 5 kilometers laufen? Can you run 5 kilometers? I said, jawohl. He sent me to the left. So what happened from this point on? I was there 2 weeks in that hell on earth, and to tell you the stories, what I heard, what I've seen, what my eyes have seen, little infants and even adult human beings alive being thrown into fiery pits. And the barracks that we were in is one barrack away from the fiery pits, and we heard the screaming and yelling for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, they put us in trucks and they took us to a labor camp called Dernhow. The labor camp was just a rock quarry. As they dynamited the mountain and the boulders were coming down, it was our job with sledgehammers to break those boulders into small manageable pieces, throw them into mining carts, run it down the hill to a grinding machine where they made gravel out of it, then push those carts back uphill. It was back-breaking work. And I figured my uncle is never going to survive this. So I bribed the chef in the kitchen with my diamonds in the shoes and to give my uncle a job in the kitchen. He took the diamonds and he gave him a job in the kitchen, which was wonderful. It was easier on us a little. But every day as we came back from work into the camp, we had to line up, and every worker inside the camp, even the kitchen help, had to come out, join us, and be counted. So they lined us up in rows of 5, and they counting us, and they wouldn't let us go this one day that we came back. And they keep counting and counting. And the commandant comes down with his Fräulein, and he says, I'm going to teach these Schweinhund a lesson they'll never forget. He'll teach us pig dogs a lesson we'll never forget. What happened? 3 inmates escaped. And because of this, he ordered his henchmen to pull out every 10th person in line to receive 25 lashes. Well, as they're counting and pulling out every 10th person in line, I can see my uncle who is in front of me is going to be a 10. So I pushed him behind and I took his place. They took us number 10s in the middle of the yard. They brought down bundles of hardwood stakes, one by one, about 2.5 feet long, these hardwood stakes. And then they brought down a sawhorse. This is a sawhorse. And this is what they ordered us to do. Tiptoe, bend over the sawhorse without touching the 2x4. One man is holding your trousers, pulling it tight, and you have to count as they were hitting you. 1, 2, 3, and so on. But also your heels cannot touch the ground. Your heels can't touch the ground. Your stomach can't touch the 2x4. One man is pulling your trousers and the other one is the hitting, and you have to count out loud. If you miscount it, you start from 1 again. If your heel touches the ground, you start from 1 again, and so on. It was impossible. If you touch the wood, you start from 1 again. I was number 4. The first man went up and he bent over and they pulled his trousers and they hit him. And every time they hit him, you see a line of blood coming right through the trousers. They hit you so hard. And he yells out, 1, 2, 3. Finally, his heel touched the ground. They start again and again. He touches the wood again and again. I can't hear you, start again and again. Finally, he collapsed. When he collapsed, the commandant goes over, kicks him in the face, get up. He couldn't. So he pulls out the revolver and he shoots him right in the temple. When he shoots him, his girlfriend, his Fräulein, goes over to him. She gives him a hug and a kiss like he just performed this heroic act. He killed a man. Remember, I was 4, not line 4. Then the second man goes up the same way. He miscounted, he touched the ground. Don't ask. He falls. The commandant goes over, kicks him in the face, get up. He couldn't. He shoots him. We have 2 dead bodies. Then they come over to the third man. The third man was a little younger. And as he was being beaten, he screams out, he says, "Have mercy on me, don't kill me." So the commandant says then, "Come over here and face me." He gets up, makes 3 steps or 5 steps, and his knees gave out from under him. He falls. The minute he falls, they walk over, they shoot him. So now we had 3 dead bodies. Ben Lesser is next in line. All I can tell you is I walked up to this sawhorse, tiptoed, bent over, and I talked to myself. I says, "Ben, if you want to live another hour, this is it. You have to do exactly what you're told. No mistakes." I tiptoe, bend over. One man is pulling my trousers, and they start to hit me, and I start to yell out, "Eins, zwei, drei, vier, fünf, sechs, sieben." Finally, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I made it. 25, I made it. You could hear a pin drop in the whole camp because no one believed that anyone could survive this. The man who was holding my trousers was an inmate. He says to me in Yiddish, he says, "Go over and thank the commandant." So I stand up, blood is running down my legs. I walk over to him, I salute him, I say, "Danke schön, Herr Kommandant." When he hears that, he puts his hand on my shirt collar, and he twists me around, facing those people who are still to be beaten. He says, "Now I told you it could be done. If you do it like this, Junge, you have nothing to worry about. While this is going on, there is a commotion at the gate." They caught those 3 inmates and they were pulling them in, all bloodied. You couldn't recognize them. When the commandant saw them, he, just like a child, gets sick of a toy. He told all of us number 10 to go back in line, and he orders his henchmen to bring down a portable gallows, which they did, and they hung every one of those individually. I'll never forget the third person when they hung him, and he was a younger man. He started to scream out, "Shema Yisrael Hashem Eloheinu." And when they heard it, they kicked the stool out from under him, not letting him complete the last 2 words, "Adonai Echad," which is unbelievable. They were such sadists. And afterwards, they dismissed us. We went for our rations like nothing ever happened. And we went to our barrack, we showered. For weeks, I could not sleep on my back. I had to sleep on my stomach because of these welts. Thanks God, they all healed up in time. For about after a few weeks, we heard at night cannon fire, like the front was closing in. And that morning when we reported to work, there was a loudspeaker saying, "No one is going to work today. The camp is being evacuated. Line up a rows of 5," and they started to march us out. My uncle was already in the kitchen working. We couldn't say goodbye to him. We never saw him again. This was the end. So now we're marching. That was called the Death March. Why did they call it the Death March? If you could not keep up pace with the soldiers, they simply shot you. And all day and all night, all day you heard shots, people being shot constantly. And they marched us like this for about, I thought, 4 or 5 weeks. I recently found out from a professor in Germany that he knew what was happening to us, said it was 7 weeks that they marched us. We were just like zombies. Days and nights didn't mean anything to us. We just walked. And and the last 2 weeks, the shoes fell apart. So we were now walking barefooted in snow. You can't imagine that feeling. We had absolutely no feeling on the bottom of our feet. And we had to go fast like zombies. And if you slowed down, they would shoot you. And after 7 weeks, we found out we arrived at Buchenwald. When we arrived at Buchenwald, they lined us up, they counted us, and they told us to go into this barrack. They'll feed you, you can shower, they'll give you fresh clothes, but tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., I want you back on the same spot. This picture was in the shower in Buchenwald. Some soldier must have taken it. I can't imagine. And how it came back to me now, um, it's a story in itself. I don't have enough time to tell all this. So now the next morning, we line up again, they count us, and they march us out from Buchenwald. About 300 yards outside of the camp, you see a whole string of cattle cars. They line us up at 82 cattle car, and they order us to go in. I tell my cousin, he was very weak. I push him up and I tell him, look, I find a spot against the wall, because I remember going to Auschwitz in the camp, in the death train like this. People were all around me. It was terrible. Against the wall, we could rest our back. And he did. He found a spot, and then he held one spot for me. They filled up the cattle car with 80 people. They closed the gate. An hour later, they opened it up, and they threw in 80 loaves of breads, a loaf of bread for each person. Picture this. Those people who were next to the door were grabbing 3, 4, 5 breads. My cousin and I were against the wall. We had nothing. We don't know where we're going, for how long we're going to go. I knew I had to get a bread. My cousin was too weak, so I started to climb over the sitting inmates to get to the door to get a bread. So as I'm climbing, one inmate had a pocket knife. He didn't like the idea, and he stabs me right in my throat. I feel a stab, and I feel blood is filling up my mouth. But I have to get a bread. I couldn't stop. I kept going. And I see this man had about 4 or 5 breads. I pull one out. He punches me. I put it in my back pocket, and I come back to my cousin. He says, Ben, what's happening to you? You're bleeding. I put my finger here, it went right through the tongue. It was a terrible gash. To this day, I still have a mark, but the mark is over my chin bone because I filled up. When I was skinny, it was in the middle of my throat. I had sense enough to take this bread and ration it out to my cousin and me, a size of a half an egg every day. So it lasted out for 2 weeks. And I had to do it in the middle of the night so no one could see us, because if they knew I had bread, they would kill us for it. People were dying all around us, 2 weeks. And after that, after 2 weeks, my bread was gone too. And we traveled, shuttled back and forth for another week. And finally, we arrived to a place called Dachau. They open up the gate. They tell everybody who can walk out of the cattle cars to walk through the tracks, go into the gate of Dachau. And all I can tell you from the 80 people in our cattle car, I think 5 of us went out, that's including me and my cousin. Everybody else was dead. This is what you see. This is the cattle cars that I was in, or one similar like it. There were many of them, and it's all in one train, and it's very well known. This is the death train from Buchenwald to Dachau. And today, I am the only survivor left from this death train, from the 3,000 people. I'm the only survivor. They told us to go in, and we went inside the camp, mountains of bodies in front of us, and they put us in a barrack right next to these bodies. Inside the barrack, they put us against the wall, no bunk, just against the wall. My cousin and I, 1 day, 2 day, the third day, we hear, Befreiung, Befreiung, liberation, Americans, Americans. I tell my cousin, let's go out and see what's going on. And we hobble out, and we see inmates are crawling on their hands and knees and kissing the boots of the GIs. They looked like gods to us. They liberated us. And we're standing in the middle of the yard when two GIs walk up to us. They had a can of Spam, and they opened it up in front of us. And we were so hungry, we were starved. And it smelled so good. And we made a mistake. We ate some of it. And both of us came down with dysentery. That night of liberation, my cousin dies in my arms. And I talk to him, I keep talking to him. And when people saw me doing this, they came and took him away. As they took him away, I followed. I wanted to know, where are you taking him? And after a few steps, my knees gave out and I fell. When I fell, they pushed me against the wall, and I lay there for a few hours. All of a sudden, a man comes up, nicely dressed, and he introduces himself in a broken German that he is a Jesuit priest, and he came here with nuns and doctors from France, and they're opening up a field hospital. He's going to take me to the field hospital, and he picks me up like a sack of bones, which I was. I was 16 years of age, and I was probably about 60 pounds at that time, maybe 62. And they put me on his shoulder, and he carries me. On the way to the infirmary, he said something I'll never forget. He says, Benek, what you went through, the only sins that you committed is that you were born to Jewish parents. What a terrible thing. However, he says, don't you ever abandon your noble religion. To hear that from a Jesuit priest in 1945 was highly unusual. You may hear it today, but not then. And he happened to be a Polish priest too. And he took me in the infirmary, and none received me. They put me on a cot with a white sheet on it. She took my vitals, and I passed out. 2.5 months later, I wake up in a monastery in Bavaria called St. Ottilien. The monks gave up one building to make it into a hospital to rehabilitate the survivors from Dachau. So anyway, 2.5 months later, I wake up, and a nun sees me. She started to scream and yell for the other nuns to come in, and the doctors came in. Anyway, they were so happy. So what happened from that point on is a story in itself. I can only tell you, read my book, I beg you, because it's so important. I joined the Chalutzim Zionist group because I felt I have to somehow liberate the country from where we were dispersed 2,000 years ago, Judea, because if we had our own country, this would have never happened. And I joined the Chalutzim. And then how I find my sister, my only surviving sister, Lola, and I. And then Lola had a child, and marriage in New York. I mean, coming to America, marrying this is my wonderful family today, and how I was able um, to turn my life around and make a beautiful life for himself. It's unbelievable. I can only ask you to read my book. You have to find out what and how I did it. And I thank you for listening to me. I'm getting a signal that my time is up. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Ben. That was really a very, very impactful story. And what you went through was tremendous. And I thank you so much for sharing this with us and and just honoring us with your presence.
That's what I do now. I've been doing this for 25 years. I devoted my life to tell the story, to keep the world from acquiring amnesia. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. I know if we could all, we'd all be just telling you individually how grateful we are for you to be
You're
sharing your
welcome.
story.
You're welcome.
And also that you started an organization, the Horror Foundation, also very important. And also the curriculum that you started through this
Yeah.
horror for teachers, and that's also very important. So you've really done a lot.
Thank you.
And anybody has any questions for Ben, please stay to the end. We'll have some questions and answers. And right now we're going to continue with our Holocaust commemoration ceremony. And we will begin with the reading of We Remember Them. And it's a responsive reading that second generation Holocaust, child of Holocaust of two survivors, a member of Shalom Bashi Packer, will lead us in this, and we'll respond. So Bashi, take it away. You have to unmute. Rabbi Cooper.
Oh, now, okay, got it. Thank you, Nira, and thank you, Ben. We remember them. At the rising of the sun and at its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and the chill of winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. As long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joy we crave to share, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them. When we have achievements that are based on theirs, we remember them. As long as we live, they too will live. For they are now a part of us as we remember them.
Well, thank you, Bashi. That was really good. So we now begin with the legacy readings, which will be led by 3 generations of Holocaust survivor Rebbetzin Judy Goldman's family. She will be followed by her daughter, Beth Shalom member Zahava Hurwitz, to read the Pledge of Acceptance, and then followed by her grandchildren, Zahava's children, to read the continuation. So Rebbetzin Judy Goldman, let me just tell you a little bit about her, was born in Lodz, Poland, and was 4 months old when the Nazis came to round up the Jews. Her parents escaped with her and led many other families to also escape to the forest to survive the war. She immigrated to the United States when she was about the age of her youngest grandchild, Ayla, who is now 9. All Holocaust survivors who are with us this evening are welcome to join in the legacy reading led now by Rebbetzin Goldman.
We take this oath We take it in the shadows of flames whose tongues scar the soul of our people. We vow with our sadness hidden, our faith renewed. We vow we shall never let the sacred memory of our perished 6 million brethren be forgotten or erased. We saw them hungry, in fear. We saw them at the threshold of death, true to their faith. We received their silence in silence. We merged their tears with ours. We are the remaining witnesses of deportations, executions, mass graves, death camps, mute prayers, and cries of revolt. The young, the old, the rich, and the poor, the ghetto fighters, the partisans, the scholars, and the messianic dreamers, the tradesmen and businessmen, the Hasidim and the Misnagdim. Like a cloud, we saw them vanish. We take this oath. Zachor, remember what the Nazi murderers and their accomplices did to our Jewish people. Remember them with rage and contempt. Remember them. Remember what an indifferent world did to us and to itself. We must also remember the good deeds of the righteous Gentiles. In their memory, we extend our hands and hearts to all Jews and vow to fight anti Semitism wherever it exists. We take this oath. Our memory will become words, words of history of the Holocaust to be handed down from generation to generation, midor lador. Unsere Kedoshim mir werden nach Kemel nicht vergessen.
We who are your sons and daughters belong to a generation in which every attempt was made for us to never exist. We who represent your victory and your triumph over evil of unthinkable dimension accept the responsibility to preserve and protect the legacy of the Holocaust. We pledge to commemorate, we pledge to educate, we pledge to forever remember. We pledge to you, our mother and fathers, who suffered in ways which words cannot describe, that our commitment is an everlasting commitment for this generation and for every generation to come. We dedicate this pledge to our beloved grandmothers and grandfathers and those who never lived to see us. We dedicate this pledge to aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, and sisters who are forever missing from our lives. And we dedicate this pledge to all the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children who were so brutally murdered, but who will always be in our thoughts and in our hearts. In their memory, we extend our hands and hearts to all Jews and vow to fight anti-Semitism wherever it exists.
Thank you. No, go ahead. I just want to say this is now the third generation grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. If there's any online, please read along with Zahavi's children.
We who are your grandchildren will carry the survivor's legacy to prove to ourselves and to others that we can carry our victory, as well as to memorialize those loved ones who perished in the Holocaust. We pledge to always remember who we are, where we came from, and also the traumas our grandparents endured and survived. Educate people of other ethnic, religious, and cultural groups about our grandparents' experiences,
and commit to using lessons of the Holocaust to support justice, tolerance, peace, kindness, and compassion, and to accept survivors' memories and to pass them on to future generations. In their memory, we extend our hands and hearts to all Jews and vow to fight anti-Semitism wherever it exists.
Thank you very much to Rebitz and Goldman and to the Hurwitz family, the 3 generations. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now we are going to take a minute and Rabbi Cooper, would you like to introduce this?
Sure. Hi, everybody. In just a moment, we'll share, as traditionally done in Israel in the observance of Yom HaShoah, and this was done last week. But as we observe Yom HaShoah tonight, we're going to take a moment for the siren, and I'll share I'll share through the sound of my computer just the sound of what the siren, actually a recorded siren from Israel, and what it sounds like. And we invite everybody to stand and observe some moments of silence as we listen to the siren and memorialize all those who perished in the Shoah. So in just a moment, I'm going to turn on the siren.
Now move from the siren that just pierced all of our hearts as we're taking in everything we're hearing right now, and we turn to the special Holocaust Kaddish. For this evening, it's going to be recited by 2 Holocaust survivors, special members of our shul, Albert Gari and Nat Lewin. And the word Kaddish is the same as the word Kedoshim or Kadosh, holy. Think about the Kedoshim. And just one thing, you'll notice the words of this Kaddish are not the ones that we're used to, since we're on Zoom. And in order to make it halachically acceptable, we don't have the regular Kaddish, we have a special Kaddish. I think that's actually very appropriate in the sense that the Kedoshim and the survivors, they always figured out a way to connect, to make things happen, to be brave. And this past year, we've also had to come up with something, and we did that with their strength. And so I think the idea of using this Kaddish is particularly moving. It's the one that we've been saying throughout this last very challenging year. So I'm going to turn it over now to Nat Lewin and Albert Gari, Holocaust survivors, to recite the special Kaddish.
I was fortunate enough to be taken with my parents from Poland as the Nazis marched in, and we escaped. But unfortunately, 3 of my grandparents were murdered in the Shoah. And therefore, when the Kaddish is recited each year, I do make notice as we come to places that I personally have very terrible experiences and memories from through my grandparents, that I note those. And as Albert will recite those places, I'll take the liberty of mentioning my grandparents and maybe the things that have affected my life with regard to those locations. Al Hakol,
Auschwitz, Birkenau, Bonn, Balanowska, Belsen.
Auschwitz-Birkenau was the place where my maternal grandfather, Naftali Sternheim, was murdered. He was a resident of Amsterdam and had tried to leave from there in a way that some of the Jews who escaped tried to do on a train, which they were told would stop at a location where they would be smuggled over into Switzerland. In fact, he did not make it. He was caught by the Swiss police, who handed him over to the Gestapo, to the Nazis, and he met his end in the gas chambers in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Yiskadal,
Belzec, Bialystok, Babi Yar.
Belzec also has a terrible memory for me. Belzec was where my paternal grandmother, the Reisha Rebbitzin, the wife of Rab Aaron Levine, who had been a member of the Polish parliament and was a leading rabbi in pre-war Poland. And after he was murdered, she hid in what you have heard was called a bunker, a place where the Jews would hide, in Lvov, in Lemberg. But they found her and her daughter, and both were taken to Belzec, where they were gassed. The Yiskadash,
Bochini, Bogdanovodka, Buchenwald.
the Yishtabach,
Chelmno, Krakow, Dachau.
the Yispar,
Dakova, Danica, Dora.
the Yisromam,
Dumanovka, Ebenze, Edineti, Flossenburg.
the Yisnase,
Großrosen, Gunskirchen, Gurs.
Shmo,
Herzogenbusk, Yassi, Javodno, Kaiserwald.
Shelmelech,
Kamenets, Podolsk, Kishinev, Kovno, Kloga.
Kovno was a location where my mother, Allah Shalom, who was really responsible for saving us and ultimately for saving the Mirror Yeshiva by obtaining the Sugihara visas, she received that visa in Kovno and Kaunas in Lithuania. And there were thousands of Jews who were saved by the Sugihara visa issued by a Japanese consul, Juni Sugihara, at his consulate in Kaunas in Kovno, which was, before the war, a great center of Jewish life. And it is remembered in lots of ways today for the very sad story and the rescue that Juni Sugihara did during 1 month in 1940 when he issued 2,000 visas. Malchei HaMlachim,
Lodz, Lublin, Lvov, Lyon.
Lodz was the city in which I was born and from which we fled in September of 1939. My father, Zichrono Livracha, had been elected to the Lodz City Council and was a member there fighting the anti-Semites in the Lodz City Council. But when my mother, who had great foresight, read that Hitler might be coming into Poland, she persuaded him that the thing we had to do was flee from Lodz. And we did, and made it through a forest on the border between Poland and Lithuania, and made it to Vilna, from which we then traveled to Moscow, ultimately Vladivostok and Japan, and finally to the United States. Lvov is Lemberg, and Lemberg is where my grandfather, the Reish Rav, Rav Aaron Levine, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, a great Talmid Chacham, a great leader of Polish Jewry, was murdered, not really by the Germans. He was murdered by the Ukrainians as the Germans were coming into Lvov in 1941. He had fled to Lvov, and there were Jews who were there and who were living there. And when the Russian army left and the German army was coming in, the Ukrainians went on a pogrom, killed several thousand Jews in 2 days, among them my grandfather and his brother, who was also a rabbi in Lvov or Lemberg, which had been a great Jewish center prior to the Nazi Holocaust and prior to what they did to the Jewish community of Poland. HaKadosh Baruch Hu,
Majdanek, Mauthausen, Minsk, Natzweiler, Neugam.
Ye'olamos Shebora
Ordruf, Plaszów, Papenburg, Ponary.
Ha'olam Hazeh,
Prague, Radom, Ravensbrück, Remsdorf, Riga.
Riga was the location of the Dutch ambassador who first wrote the first authorization to my mother that opened up the gates to the Dutch West Indies, to Suriname and Curacao. And on that basis, from Riga and from what he had written in Riga, there were thousands of Jews who were saved, because that enabled Sugihara to issue visas to go through Japan on the way, in theory, to Curacao. V'ha'olam haba,
Sachenburg, Sachsenhausen, San Saba, Shauriai.
Kirchono,
Skarzesko, Kameina, Sobibor, Stutthof.
V'chirchon Yereyav,
Theresienstadt, Transnistria, Treblinka, Vilna.
Vilna was viewed as the Jerusalem of Lithuania. There were Jews, amazingly brilliant Jews, and schools and Torah study in Vilna. And of course, everybody knows of the Vilna Gaon. And many of the Jews who fled from Poland made it to Vilna, and then from Vilna, as we did, to Moscow, Moscow to Vladivostok, Vladivostok to Kobe, Japan, and those of us who were really fortunate to the United States of America. V'chirtzon kol beis Yisrael,
Viavara, Warsaw, Zemun, Zhytomyr, and the scores of other camps.
Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Huya Aseh Shalom Aleinu, Yal Kol Yisrael, B'Yimru. Amen.
Thank you very much to Albergari and to Nat Lewin. I really appreciate that meeting. And now we're going to all sing the partisan song. We can unmute everybody, and it's going to be led by Barbara Chessman. It's called Zognit Kleinmal, and it is considered the main Yiddish anthem of the Holocaust. The lyrics were written by Hirsch Glick in 1943 in Vilna, and it was sung in the ghettos and by Jewish resistance fighters, and later by Holocaust survivors and at Holocaust memorials all over the world. So the words should be on the screen, and when we see the words, we'll all be singing it loud and proud. And thank you, Barbara Chessman, for leading it.
Deb.
I'd like the words for it.
Yeah, we're just waiting for the words. Rabbi Cooper.
We can get the words.
Here we are. Oh, that's gonna be tough for some. Oh, here's the. I can read that, but it's hard to read.
Well, I could just start out by just reading the English. Just the last few lines that are very meaningful, where it says, let's see, this. So never say that you're going
your last
way, although the sky's filled with lead, cover blue days. Our promised hour will come soon. Our marching steps rising out. We are here, and so it's a very, very powerful song. And so, Barbara, you can take it away, and then you can unmute us, and we can all sing it together. Barbara, you start. You have to unmute yourself, Barbara. Barbara. Okay, Barbara, you want to start?
Okay. Kein Mal auf den letzten Weg. Gott im Land Bayern verstehen bläue Tag. Komm weg doch unser Ausgebend geschah. Das Wetter beugt und wir seinen da. In dem Palmenland bis weißen Land von Schnee. Wir kommen an mit unser Weg. Und wo gefallen süßer Spritz von unser Blut. Sprossen wird dort unser Gwure und der Mut. Es wird die Morgensonne vergilden und dem Heind. Und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Nur heute versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajot. Wie ein Parol soll gehen das Lied von uns Dor zu Dor. Das Lied geschrieben ist mit Blut und mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Titel von einer Vogel auf der Frei. Das hat der Volk zwischen vom dicke Band. Das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in der Hand. Sie sagt nicht kein Mal, als du gehst den letzten Weg. Kannst Stimmen Bleien verstehen, blöde Tag. Kommen wird noch unser Zisgebende Show. Das Wetter heute kann unser Tag mehr sein, doch.
Jeffrey Nadell playing the piano and singing it.
Okay, thank you so much, Barbara. Barbara is also a second generation.
Courage.
We really appreciate you singing that for us. And now we're going to sing Hatikva, and Hatikva is going to be led by Abe Cherek. Abe, are you on?
I am.
Oh, yay. Okay. So everybody, you can unmute yourselves, or hopefully Rabbi Cooper, can you unmute everybody? And Abe will lead us in the Hatikva, the hope. We can all join in. Much. Thank you to Abe Cherrick for leading us in that beautiful rendition of Hatikva. And thank you to all of our participants and especially to our speaker, Ben Lesser, for moving testimony. Thank you for sharing your story. We also want to thank all of our sponsors for tonight, and especially to the Rabbi Cooper, Rabbi Antine, who were so instrumental in helping me put this all together. And Ben, I know there would probably be a lot of questions for you. And so if you wouldn't mind just taking a few minutes and staying on, and whoever's interested to stay on for a little bit of a Q&A with Ben. Thank you so much. Does anybody have a question? Maybe you can put it in the chat and
Chat.
and
I have questions.
Okay, Basha, go ahead.
I don't see Ben though. Where is he? Let's see.
Okay.
Hi Ben, I'm Bashi.
Hi.
Hi,
Yes,
it's nice to meet you. I volunteer at the Holocaust Museum doing research on victim histories, and also I'm half Hungarian. So I had a couple questions. First of all, when you were in Munkach, did you go to school there?
No.
Okay. Because we visited the gymnasium, and there are several people in our shul whose fathers went there, and I have a friend who went there, so I was just curious. And the other question is, you talked about the shoes with the diamonds hidden. Yes. I thought that when people arrived in Auschwitz that the Nazis took all their clothes and their shoes away and gave them those wooden clogs. So how did you manage to keep your shoes?
When they told us to get undressed and get out of your shoes, leave everything there, I got undressed, but I hated to get out of the shoes because I knew I had these diamonds. My uncle who gave them to me and his son, they got out of him, and I was the only one. And I went to the barbers, they cut my hair all over, and they didn't say anything about my shoes. Then I went into the showers with my shoes on.
Wow.
I just got away.
It's amazing. Kol
yeah.
hakavod.
Thank you.
Ben, can you just say the name of your book? A few people asked if you could repeat it.
Sure. The name of the book is Living a Life That Matters, From Nazi Nightmare to American Dream. I don't know if you see it.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Okay.
And this is Gail, Ben's daughter, second generation. Hello, everybody. If you visit our website at ZahorRemembrance.org, I'm sorry, Zahor Holocaust Foundation.org. We'll put it up for you. he will also write a personal note to you and sign the book.
Very nice. Does anybody else have a question that would want to? Anybody else want to ask Ben a question? Okay, yeah, Elle, you want to unmute yourself?
Okay.
Okay, sorry, I was just typing it out, but I'll say it. So hi, thank you for having me. I'm attending from Los Angeles, but I am a DC native from McLean and a Helm descendant like Nira. And on my other side, from Waj Kalish area of survivors as well.
Yeah.
It took me a minute to figure out where I recognize this handsome gentleman, Ben, because I have not yet read his book, although I'm ordering it from the Zechor website. And I realized it's because I saw him on the PBS show with Ann Curry, We'll Meet Again.
Yes, yes.
And so my question is, have you kept in touch with Moshe's children that you got to meet on your trip?
Yes, we did.
That's
We
wonderful.
keep in touch with them, of course. They're very dear to us.
I love to hear that. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, very dear. That was a good show.
Yes, and I'm glad I recognized when I figured out the connection,
Yeah.
and I look forward to reading your memoir as well as sharing the resources for education with others in our community.
Thank
So
you.
thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Elle, for that question. Does anybody else have a question? You can put it in the chat. I can ask him, or if you want to just unmute yourself and ask. I just wanted to, I'll just wait to see if anybody else has a question. They can put it in the chat again. Ben, can you tell us about, I know you started the Zechor Holocaust curriculum, and this is like the only curriculum for teachers that was actually started by Holocaust survivors. Is that correct?
Correct. It's written by me, and it's the only curriculums that I know of that's written by a survivor. And I did it because I found out that the schools are not teaching it, and it made me very upset. So because when I talk to the principals, they tell me that they can't afford the books. Their books are falling apart. You can't afford to buy them. But I asked the teachers, why aren't you teaching? They don't have enough time. They don't give them enough time to teach the Holocaust. So that's why I wrote the curriculum, so that now it's free of charge, and the principals can't complain about cost. The teachers can choose to teach a little more, or the whole story, but teach. That's important. And I want the world to not to forget, and the Holocaust must be taught. And I'm doing everything possible to make the United States, where teaching the Holocaust will be mandatory, or if not mandatory, at least some teachings that should be taught. Anyway, this is my whole life right now. I devote myself to do this, and not just the curriculum. It's so important in many things that I do. The shout out program is so important because we are looking for 6 million shout outs to compensate for the 6 million silenced voices. And remember, if you shout out on our website, it's going to remain on the website for generations to come. So, I don't know what happened. What happened?
We also have an AI, artificial intelligence, where students for free could come on, or anybody could come on to the AI. It's called Storyfile on our website, and just ask Ben a question. What year were you born? You know, tell us about your time in Auschwitz, and he will be able to answer the question. He made sure that this program is going to live on our website for generations and generations to come. Right now, most of this type of programming you see is hosted by museums or other big organizations, and you have to be there to do it. No, you could do it on your computer. You could even do it on your cell phone, and talk to Ben on your cell phone and ask him hundreds of questions, and he'll answer them.
That's amazing. I think that's it's fantastic that you did that. And Ben, I really commend you for taking the time and the energy to really, you know, put on move forward a Holocaust education for the future, and really thinking about future generations. And that's and I personally feel that's so important, being a daughter of two Holocaust survivors. I think,
Yes.
and I, you know, I say kol hakavod to you, and may you keep going from strength to strength. Does anybody else have a question? You can unmute yourself if you want to ask Ben one last question. No? Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to ask him, how long were you in, you went and fought in the War of Independence in pre-state Israel, and how long did you remain in Israel before you came to the US?
To answer your question, you have to read my book, because
I'm going to read your book.
I never got to Israel.
Oh,
The
okay.
last day before boarding ship, I found my sister alive.
Okay.
And it's a whole story. So I had to leave the Chalutzim.
Got it.
To see my living sister, and I missed going to Israel, but I was in Israel many times.
I'm sure. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much
You're
for
welcome.
sharing everything tonight.
Yeah. So how did so instead of going to Israel, you came to the United States?
I came to the United States, and I made a beautiful life for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw the beautiful photo of your family, and
I always am and will support Israel. Every Jewish person had to do this, because without Israel, who knows what can happen again any part of the world. But as long as we have an Israel, there'll never be another Holocaust.
amen. Amen to that. So thank you very much. Oh, I have one more question.
Good.
Question is just, I would like to pay a quick tribute to my father, who was deported in one of the Channel Islands between France and Great Britain, and he was also brutalized by the Nazis and by the Ukrainians. He said the Russians, but it was Ukrainians actually who were there. They said they were worse than the Germans actually, and so I wanted to just.
I know that.
I was a hidden child, so I was spared all the horrors of the camps, and I survived that way. Thank you.
You're still a survivor. You're a hidden child. You survived.
Yes.
You survived. And God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you too.
Can I ask one thing?
Sure. Go ahead, Warren.
Yeah, did you ever run into Irving Roth? Does that name sound familiar? He worked with Kufi, also a survivor, with groups on campuses to bring the message that you just brought tonight to the students on campus, to the organization. And tragically, he passed away about 2 months ago. And that's a big shoe to fill. Is this something you might be interested in doing on a little bit of a basis, not full-time, part-time?
Of course. I read all these books. I'm surprised that I haven't read his book.
Okay, yeah, it's very similar. But what they are doing is teaching Holocaust to university students who many never heard of it, just about. And it's a wonderful way to do it. And I'm wondering if you're interested in maybe taking a look at it.
Yes, I will
Yes.
speak for him. Yes, he will be.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, he is.
All right, you'll get a call.
There was a question that somebody had asked about if how do they get you to sign their book? And I believe that your daughter Gail had said that if they order it through the Zahor Foundation, that it will be signed.
Yeah, there will be a place to personalize it that they could put in for a person's name or any information they want to give.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I guess we're going to close the program. And again, I want to thank the rabbis and all the participants that did such an amazing job. I thank Rebbitzin Goldman and the Hurwitz family and Bashi Packer. And I thank Abe Cherrick and Barb Chessman and of course, Nat Lewin and Alberga Reed, everybody and all our sponsors. Thank you so much. And thank you for never forgetting. That's it's you hear it a lot, but it's very important. And I thank you all very much. Have a
Thank you, Nira. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you,
all your work that you do.
Thank
Thank you, Nira.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Okay, thank you.